Hey, what's up, creepy crew? Welcome back. So today, we're diving into some Facebook stories. And listen, I know that sounds tame, but some of these genuinely got under my skin while I was putting this together. Weird, unsettling, the kind of stuff that makes you rethink who you're actually talking to online. If you're new here, welcome to the creepy crew. Glad you found us. Hit subscribe and leave a like if you're enjoying the video. It really helps the channel grow. And if you've ever had a weird experience on Facebook yourself, you know where to share it. Alright, let's get into it. I still can't look at our driveway without thinking, what if he's standing there again, at the edge? That probably sounds dramatic, but it doesn't feel dramatic. It just feels true. And I keep coming back to it every time I pull up to the house. This was last autumn, when me and Den had just moved into our first actual house. Not an apartment, not a studio, a house with a yard and a fence and a driveway. We were excited. We were idiots about it, honestly, in the way you are when something feels too good. Neither of us had ever dealt with a lawn before. We didn't own a single tool. Den asked a co-worker who gave us a contact for some lawn crew, and the price they quoted was just not happening. I don't remember the exact number, but it was the kind of number that makes you laugh a little, and then feel bad for laughing. So I did what I always do. I opened Facebook, found the local neighborhood group, and scrolled until I found something. There was a post from a guy named Trevor. Weekend lawn mowing, cash or transfer. Price was almost half what the other guys quoted. His profile looked normal. Photos, mutual connections, a few comments under the post from people saying he did good work. I messaged him. He wrote back within like 10 minutes, very polite, asked for some details about the yard, said he could come by to take a look before we committed to anything. He came that same week, walked the whole property, measured stuff with his eyes, said he'd have no problem. Normal, professional even. I felt good about it. Then that evening I got a message from him. "You've got a nice setup here, big lot." That's it. That's all he said. I read it 3 times. I couldn't put my finger on what bothered me about it. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't weird on the surface. But something about it just sat wrong. Like, why say that? What was the point of saying that? We scheduled him for Tuesday. Den and I were both at work, which we'd told Trevor up front, and he'd said that was totally fine. He didn't need anyone there. He'd just do the job and send a confirmation after. So Tuesday morning I'm at work, and at 9 I get a message from him on Facebook. "You already left?" I wrote back that yeah, I'm at work, like we discussed. Okay. 2 hours pass, and then another message. "Den's not home either." And I don't know how to explain this, but something about that question, the way it was phrased, like he was checking, made my stomach feel wrong. I replied that yes, we both work. That's literally why we arranged this the way we did. He went quiet after that. 6 in the evening he messaged again. "Car trouble, couldn't make it. Can we reschedule?" Fine. Thursday I agreed to, same arrangement. And Thursday morning the exact same thing happened. Questions starting around 9. Where am I? When am I coming home? Almost word for word from Tuesday. Then at 6, another excuse. Something about the equipment this time. But at the end of Thursday's message, he added something. "You're not upset with me, are you?" And it wasn't what he said. It was the tone of it. Familiar. Like we were old friends. Like there was some kind of relationship here I hadn't agreed to. I showed the messages to Den that night. Den said to cancel it. Friday I had the day off. I didn't tell Trevor that. I left the house around 8 and texted him that I wasn't home. He replied pretty fast. "Okay, when are you back?" I didn't answer that. An hour and a half later, he sent another message. Equipment issue. Couldn't come today either. I wrote back, "Thanks anyway. We're going to find someone else." Short, polite, done. He replied immediately, "Wait, I can explain." I left it on read. Saturday I was at work, got home around 5, and my phone had 5 messages from him, all sent within about a 40-minute window while I was driving back. He was saying he had come to the house that day. I hadn't told him I'd be gone, hadn't confirmed anything. We'd already ended it. And he was saying he'd mowed the lawn, and now he needed to be paid, cash, preferably today. I went outside to look at the yard. I couldn't tell if anything had been done or not. The grass looked about the same to me. I messaged him back and said I'd need to actually see the work before I paid for anything, and offered to do a transfer through an app because I don't carry cash. He started pushing back immediately. Cash only today. He'd done the work. What was my problem? I didn't respond after that. Instead, I called my friend Mara and asked if she'd come over, just to have someone else there. She came without asking questions, which I appreciated. We walked the whole yard together. Trevor wasn't there. There was no obvious sign anyone had mowed anything. Mara offered to stay the night and I almost said yes. I didn't, but almost. Den changed the locks 2 weeks later. Not because of anything specific that happened after, just because we both felt like it needed to happen. I never heard from Trevor again after I stopped responding. His profile is still up on Facebook. Sometimes I check it. I don't know why. I think what got to me most, looking back, wasn't any single thing he did. It was how methodical it felt. The way he kept checking whether we were home. The way he escalated when I tried to end it cleanly. That's the part I can't shake. That felt like someone who had done this before and knew exactly what he was doing. I paid him. It felt gross, but I paid him just to make it stop. I did a transfer through the app, sent the amount he was asking for, and he went quiet. No response, no confirmation, nothing. I told myself that was fine, that silence was what I wanted. And for a while it worked. A week passed, then 3 weeks. Then a month and a half went by, and I genuinely started to feel like it was over. I stopped checking his Facebook profile. I stopped tensing up every time I pulled into the driveway. Den and I had a normal autumn. We raked the leaves ourselves, bought a secondhand mower off a different neighborhood group, figured it out. Life went back to whatever normal is. Then one evening, Den mentioned, totally casual, like it was nothing, that some guy had come by while I was out. Knocked on the door, said he offered yard services in the area, left a business card. Den handed me the card. The name on it was Trevor. I just stared at it. Den was watching me and said the guy seemed totally normal, calm, professional. Asked if we needed any help with the property. Looked around the yard a little. I asked Den if Trevor had said anything about having been here before. Den frowned and said, "No, actually it seemed like the guy was seeing the house for the first time, like he was introducing himself fresh." I felt something go cold in my chest, because that meant Trevor had come back to our house and pretended to be a stranger, to my husband's face. Den said he'd asked a couple of questions before leaving, whether Den lived alone or with someone, and then he'd asked about our dog. Specifically whether the dog was big and whether it went out into the yard. We don't have a dog. I don't know why he assumed we did or what he was trying to figure out by asking. Den was quiet for a second after I explained who Trevor was. Then he said he wished he'd known, that he would have handled it differently. I don't know what that means exactly, and I didn't ask. A few days later, Den remembered one more detail from the conversation. He said Trevor had brought up a wasp nest, mentioned there was one under the roof of the garden shed, asked how long it had been there and whether it was causing any problems. I stopped moving when Den said that, because I knew exactly where Trevor had gotten that information. A few weeks before any of this, I'd posted in our neighborhood's closed Facebook group asking for advice about a wasp nest under the shed roof. Just a normal post, asking if anyone had dealt with it, what actually works. The group is closed. You have to be approved to join. There is no way to see that post from the street. You cannot see the shed roof clearly from outside the fence. There is nothing written on the property about it. Trevor knew about that wasp nest because he had been reading the group, reading my posts, maybe for weeks. Den went pale when I connected it out loud. My car had been in the driveway that day. Den had come home later in his. From the street, it would have looked like I was there alone. I didn't call the police. I ran through it in my head 100 times and kept arriving at the same problem. What exactly do I report? A man knocked on our door and offered to mow the lawn, but I don't open the gate anymore unless I know exactly who's on the other side of it. When I flew to Tucson to look for housing, I had 3 days and a budget that's embarrassing to call a budget. I'm not going to pretend I was in a great position. I needed a place, I needed it fast, and I couldn't afford to be picky, which is probably the worst headspace to be in when you're looking at apartments on Facebook Marketplace in a city you've never lived in. I started looking at listings while I was still on the plane. There were a few in the right price range, but they were going fast. Like, I messaged someone and they responded 20 minutes later saying it was already gone. So I sent messages to maybe 6 or 7 people at once, just to have options. One of them wrote back almost immediately. The listing was simple, nothing fancy. A few photos of the rooms, a short description. Price was within what I could do. We agreed on a viewing Monday afternoon, west side of the city. He asked me to text 30 minutes before I arrived, said he'd be nearby. So I did. And then nothing. I waited a few minutes, figured he was just driving, and started walking over anyway. I was probably halfway there when he called me back, and he was annoyed. Not yelling, but that tone where you can tell someone is keeping a lid on it. Turns out my phone hadn't updated the time zone automatically after landing, so I was walking over 40 minutes early. I apologized, explained what happened, offered to just wait outside until the right time. He said no before I even finished the sentence. It was fast, almost automatic, like the idea of me standing near the house was a problem on its own. I said okay, and found a cafe across the street. Got a coffee, looked at my phone, killed the time. It was weird, but I told myself it wasn't a big deal. He probably just valued his privacy. Some people are like that. When I came back at the actual time, he was already on the front porch. Mid-50s, unshaven, wrinkled shirt. Not unfriendly exactly, but distracted. Like part of his attention was somewhere else the whole time. We shook hands, and he started explaining the place a little. That's when the side door opened. A younger guy came out fast, like he'd been waiting to leave. He glanced at us, didn't say anything, walked straight to his car, and drove off. Quick. I asked the landlord if that was another person looking at the place. He said yeah, another applicant. I asked why the guy seemed in such a hurry, just making conversation, and the landlord shrugged. Didn't explain anything. I let it go because I needed the apartment and I wasn't in a position to be pushing buttons. Inside was different from the photos. Not completely different, but enough that you noticed. The walls were rough in a way that suggested they'd been patched and not painted over properly. One window in the back room was covered with plywood, not boarded up like something happened, just covered, like they ran out of glass or interest. There was a smell in the far room, damp and stale. The kind that means water got in somewhere and wasn't dealt with right. I asked about the plywood. He said they hadn't finished the repairs. I asked about the smell. He said the same thing. Every time I pointed something out, he had the same answer. Not done yet, still working on it. Or he just didn't say anything, just moved to the next room. I kept asking because I genuinely wanted to understand what I was paying for, but I wasn't getting real answers. After we went through the main rooms, he said he wanted to show me a separate structure at the back of the property. Storage, he said, for keeping stuff. He didn't ask if I was interested. He just said it and started walking. I followed him because the situation felt off but not dangerous, and I didn't want to be rude about it. That's honestly the reason. It's not like I had some red flag alarm going off. It just seemed awkward to suddenly refuse to follow a landlord around his own property. We went behind the house, then further. The yard was bigger than it looked from the street, and the back part was uneven. Weeds and dry scrub, no path. He kept walking and I kept following. We got far enough back that the house itself was behind us, and then further still, until we were at the edge of the property where it met a line of trees. Scrubby desert trees, nothing dense, but enough that when I turned around I couldn't see the street anymore. Couldn't see the neighboring houses either. Just the back of his property and those trees and the two of us standing there. He hadn't said anything for the last couple minutes of walking. No explanation of what we were looking at. No storage unit in sight. He just stopped and stood there looking at the trees. I stopped too. I didn't know what to say. I keep coming back to that moment. Standing at the back of that lot. No one visible in any direction. Landlord quiet. Nothing around. It didn't feel dangerous in the way you'd expect. It felt wrong in a quieter way. The kind that you don't fully process until later when you're somewhere safe and you're replaying it in your head. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know what that was supposed to be. What I do know is, I should have walked out the second I saw that plywood window. The second that other guy practically ran to his car. The second the landlord said no to me waiting outside. Some things are obvious in hindsight. Most things are. The shed looked normal from the outside. Just a basic wooden structure. Nothing that would make you stop and think twice. Inside, it was empty. Bare walls, dirt floor, nothing stored in there at all, which already didn't make sense for a place he described as useful for keeping your stuff. And then I saw it. In the center of the floor, there was a wooden hatch with a metal ring on it, like a cellar door. He bent down, pulled it open, and underneath was a ladder going straight down into nothing. Not dim, not shadowy, just complete black. No bottom visible, no light coming from anywhere. He pulled out his phone, shone the flashlight down the hole, and started climbing down. Didn't say come on, didn't look back, didn't explain anything. Just descended. I stood at the edge of the hatch and watched his phone light get smaller. Then he stopped somewhere below and called up, "Come on down, it's fine." That was it. That was the whole pitch. No reason, no context. No, this is where you'd keep your furniture, or here's the extra storage space I mentioned. Just come down. It's fine. I didn't move. I stood there looking at that ladder going into the dark and realized I had no idea how deep it went, what was down there, or why any of this was part of a rental viewing. There was no logical reason for me to go down there. None. And for the first time since I'd arrived, I stopped making excuses for everything and just let myself register how wrong this was. That's when I caught movement at the corner of my eye. I turned my head toward the side wall of the shed, and there was a man standing there. Just standing, not doing anything, not saying anything. Hands in his pockets. I hadn't heard him come in. I didn't know how long he'd been there. I didn't run right away. My brain kind of stalled for a second, which I think is just what happens. You don't instantly bolt, you freeze first, and then your body figures it out. I took one step back toward the door, then another. Then I turned and walked fast out of the shed. As soon as I cleared the corner of the building, I started running. Not looking back, not slowing down. Across the yard, through the gate, down the street. I ran until I hit an intersection with actual traffic, actual people, cars moving in both directions. Then I stopped and stood on the sidewalk and just breathed. I looked back down the street. Nobody following, as far as I could see. Back at the hotel, I looked up the property address in the county assessor's database. The house was listed as vacant and for sale. Last recorded occupants had moved out over 2 years ago. I went back to my browser history and tried to pull up the Facebook Marketplace listing. Page was gone. Deleted. Not just expired. Gone. I didn't call the police. I thought about what I'd actually tell them. That a landlord showed me a dark basement and asked me to come down. That a guy was standing in a shed. I had no proof of anything, and I didn't know what anything meant, technically. So I found another place to stay, signed a short-term lease 2 days later, and moved on. But sometimes I think about that other guy. The one who came out the side door fast and didn't say a word and drove away. I wonder if he'd been down that ladder. I wonder what he saw. Back then, I was living alone and ordering delivery almost every evening. I know. It wasn't exactly a healthy period of my life, and cooking just wasn't happening. Whether I couldn't or just didn't want to, I honestly don't even remember anymore. It was one of those stretches where you're just getting through the week, you know? I had a few different apps on my phone, and I'd rotate between them depending on what I was craving. Nothing fancy. That specific night, I ordered sushi from a place maybe 10 minutes from my apartment. Not because it was particularly good, just because I'd ordered from there before and knew what to expect. The delivery took maybe 40 minutes. The courier was a guy, probably around 30, wearing the branded cap that comes with working for the app. Nothing about him stood out at all. I opened the door, he held out the bag, I said thank you. He might have said have a good evening, or maybe he didn't. I genuinely cannot tell you because the whole exchange took maybe 15 seconds, and my brain just didn't register it as anything worth storing. I took the bag, closed the door, put it on the table, and started eating while watching something on my laptop. That was the entirety of that interaction as far as I was concerned. I didn't look at his face long enough to describe it. Didn't notice anything weird in his tone or behavior. It was as standard and forgettable as a delivery gets. 3 days later, I got a message on Instagram. Not a follow request, a direct message, which means it landed in my message requests folder. The profile name was Ray. The profile photo looked like a real person, normal picture, nothing obviously fake about it. The message said something like, "Hey, it's me. I delivered your order on Wednesday. You seemed interesting, so I wanted to reach out." I sat there staring at my phone for a solid minute, just trying to process what I was reading. Because here's the thing. My Instagram account was set to private. My username wasn't my full name. It was a shortened version. Kind of a nickname that only people who already knew me would recognize. Finding me through that alone, without knowing anything else about me, would have been genuinely difficult. But in the delivery app, when you place an order, your full name is right there, along with your address. So what he did, and I kept running through this in my head trying to figure out if I was wrong, but I wasn't, was take my full name from the order, search for me on Instagram using that, find the right account even though it was private, and my name there wasn't a direct match, and then send me a message. That's not something that happens by accident. That requires actual effort and intent. I didn't respond. I just closed the app and sat there trying to decide if this was something I should be worried about or if I was overreacting. Part of me wanted to write it off as just some guy being awkward and not thinking through how weird this was. But another part of me kept coming back to the fact that he'd used my personal information from a work transaction. Information I gave the app, not him. to track me down for personal reasons. That's not awkward. That's a boundary being crossed. The next day, he sent another message. Just, hi. No follow-up to what he'd said before, no explanation, nothing. Just that one word. And honestly, that one word bothered me more than the first message did. Because it wasn't threatening and it wasn't aggressive, but it also wasn't going away on its own. And I had no idea what his actual goal was here or where he thought this was going to go. I blocked the profile. Then I went into the delivery app and dug around until I found the complaints and feedback section. I typed out what happened, that a courier had used customer data from an order to locate and contact me through a personal social media account. I kept it factual, sent it, and figured I'd either hear back or I wouldn't. The app responded within a few hours with an automated reply saying they'd received my report. I didn't expect much beyond that, honestly. But the next day, an actual person from their support team sent a follow-up saying they were looking into the situation and that this kind of behavior violated their policies for delivery partners. They didn't tell me what specifically they were going to do or what would happen to him, and I didn't push for details. I just wanted it on record that it happened. I never got another message from Ray after that. Whether they fired him or just warned him or did nothing and he decided on his own to stop, I have no idea. I never found out. What I did after all of that was go through every app and account I had that showed my real full name and either remove it or replace it with just my initials. The delivery apps, a couple of other platforms, anywhere my last name was visible and searchable, I took it out. It took maybe an hour total, and it's one of those things that feels almost silly while you're doing it, like you're being paranoid. But then you think about how little effort it took for a stranger to connect a food order to a private social media profile using just a name and a search bar, and it stops feeling silly pretty fast. I don't think about it constantly, but I never went back to putting my real name anywhere public again, and I genuinely don't plan to. After a while, I stopped thinking about what Ray had actually done and started thinking about everything around it. Like, the message was one thing. He sent 2 messages, I blocked him, done. But what I couldn't stop coming back to was everything that happened before that message. How many times did he open my profile before he decided to write? Because you don't just find someone and immediately send a message. You look first. You scroll through their photos. You think about it. And all of that happened without me knowing any of it was happening. He had my address. He'd physically been to my address. He stood at my door, handed me a bag. And then he went home and looked me up and spent some amount of time on my profile that I will never know. I was completely visible to him, and he was completely invisible to me. That's the part that actually got under my skin when I really sat with it. I went back into both of my delivery apps after that and actually looked at what information was stored in my accounts, which I had genuinely never done before, not really. The location settings had defaulted to on, not just my saved address, but active location tracking while the app was open. My home address was saved and labeled home, which obviously is exactly what it was, but seeing that word next to my actual street address in a list that any number of couriers had access to when delivering to me felt different than it had before. My full name was there too, first and last, exactly as it appears on my ID. I changed all of it that same evening, initials only for the name, removed the home label, turned off location permissions when the app wasn't actively in use. It took maybe 20 minutes and I kept thinking the whole time that I should have done this a long time ago. Not because something terrible happened, but because I just hadn't thought about it. I'd handed over that information without ever considering who else could see it on the other end. I never found out if Ray faced any consequences from the platform. They didn't follow up with me after that second message saying they were looking into it. No update, no confirmation, nothing. He either stopped showing up in my orders because they removed him or suspended him, or maybe he was still delivering and I just didn't recognize his name when it appeared. I have no idea. My friend, when I told her what happened, said, I mean, he just sent a message. What's the big deal? And I didn't bother trying to explain it in full because it would have taken too long, and I wasn't sure I could make her understand without it sounding like I was overreacting. But the thing is, the issue was never really about the message itself. 2 words, a hi, a compliment, easily ignored. The issue was that he looked at my name on a work order and decided that was a reasonable starting point for finding someone personally. That the information I gave a delivery app to get food to my door was, in his view, available to him for whatever he wanted to do with it. That's a decision he made. That's a line he chose to cross without what I can only assume was any real consideration of whether he should. And somewhere right now he's probably out on a route, looking at a name on an order form. I don't know what he does with that. I just know I'm not using my real name on anything anymore.